just saw you like 2 minutes ago. If it's been like a week since you did the last video, you're not working hard enough. You're not spending enough time in the code. Okay? You should be coding more than 7 minutes. All right? So, yeah, I'm talking to you. So, what we want to do now is actually get our form working with some code. And there's some things we got to do in order to communicate with the DOM. And so, let's set that up now. Over here in our blank calc.js file, there are some things that we need to do. Now, I want you to picture in your head the possible things that we need to do from a user perspective, or at least from an application perspective. First off, a user enters text, right? They enter text into the first text box, they enter text into the second text box. Okay, so what needs to happen is when a submit button is clicked, okay, it needs to grab the information from the first box, it needs to grab it from the second box, and then it needs to run the mathematical operation to figure out what the percentage is, okay, and then it needs to spit out the result back on the screen. So there's a few things we need to do there, and so it's really good to break out problems like this, because as you're coming into problems and your teacher or your peers aren't available, you can actually Google these things like, how do I get text out of an input text field? Or how do I call a function from a input submit button? And you can actually search those things on the internet and you'll find answers to all those things. And that is much better asking those questions than being like, how do I do this? Coming to a chat room or something and saying, how do I do this? So it's really important you learn how to break down problems so you know the right questions to ask. So going to the first part of it, we need to get data out of our text fields, right? The answer to that is yes, we do. So let's look at our index.html. How do we get data out of this text field right here? Input type equals text. Well, there is a way, and we can't really do anything unless we can properly identify this text field. So what we're going to do is we're going to set an ID here, okay? And we're going to call this, let's call this num field 1. Okay, and obviously we're probably going to need a second one here. So let's set an ID equals num field 2. Now the IDs are important and they do need to be unique so you can access it inside of your code. Okay, num field 1, num field 2. So let's go ahead in our JavaScript and actually grab those things. So we're going to create a variable that actually stores an HTML object. I know that sounds crazy, but that's what we're going to do. In the past, you've probably created variables with numbers or strings. We're actually going to create a variable that stores an HTML element, okay? It's pretty cool. And some type of object that it's being created into, of course, a JavaScript object. But it does all the work for us behind the scenes. So what we're going to do is say var, and I think it was num field, right? So num field 1 is equal to document.getElementById, okay? And we're going to say num field 1. Okay, so this is really interesting. Here are some important things to understand. Okay, document.getElementById num field 1. Okay, so here in HTML, the moment that we hit this line of code here in our HTML, it comes into JavaScript and then it grabs a reference to that object. So now once this happens, it's connected. This num field 1 is now connected to this element right here, which is really cool. There's like a link between them. And so document, this is an internal property that the JavaScript knows how to find, okay? So every browser handles this differently. Chrome, okay, when you access Chrome, it handles it a certain way. Internet Explorer or Edge, Firefox, they all know what to do with this, okay? GetElementById is a function on top of the document that actually goes and grabs the element on the page by the ID that we set and stores it in here, okay? Pretty cool. You've worked with variables. You know what a variable is. And now we're just storing a reference to the object there. So what we want to do is make sure that it works. Okay, make sure that our field actually has a reference. And this one's pretty simple. All we need to do, in fact, we can do an alert instead, so we don't have to pull open the console.log just for fun. We're going to alert num field 1 dot value. Okay, dot value is how we reference the text that's inside of the. It's how we reference the text that's inside of the field here, okay? So let's go back to our code. And if I say 5, actually, you know what? This is not a good idea. I just realized that at the time of load, that field is gonna have nothing in it. So that doesn't really make sense, does it? So what we need to do is we just want to make sure that our field actually has data in it. So all we're trying to do here is run a test. We should do the opposite thing. Let's just actually set the value on it, and then you can see it in the HTML. Okay, so of course right now there's nothing in the, if we pull open this browser here, there's nothing in this field, right? So what we're gonna do, let's make this half the screen and make this half the screen here. We're just gonna set the value of this and see what happens. So we're gonna say numfield1.value equals, I'm gonna say, hey Bob, save it, and there you see it instantly updated. So our JavaScript is definitely connected to our form, and that link is definitely working. Okay, that's the point I'm trying to make here. Is our field linked to the HTML? Yes, it is, and we're able to successfully set a value to it. So this is really cool. And what you can already do is you can start thinking of how you can start modifying things in your HTML from code, which we just did here by grabbing the element and then setting the value on the property. Lots of cool things you can think of as you're going about learning how to do this here. So this is really good stuff. Well, this is great progress we're making. And so we've got numfield1. We might as well grab numfield2 while we're at it. Document.getElementById, numfield2. Now what else do we need to grab? Well, we know that there's a result we got to display on the page. So somehow the code's going to need to say, hey, result, update. So we should probably grab that as well too. And we probably haven't even created an ID for it yet. At least I can't remember if we did, but it's okay to do it in code first and then go to the HTML. So we're going to say var result field equals document.getElementById, and we're going to call this result field. And then we can go back over here into our index.html and put an ID on the result, which is just, you can put IDs on almost anything. So it's going to be result field. Was it result or results? Result. Cool. So this is looking good, and what we can do is we can of course run tests on these here, just like we did before, to make sure that everything's connected. One thing that'll happen if it's not connected is you'll get errors, and so it's just good to always check these just for fun. And so, I could say numfield2.value equals test. Okay, that's a text field. There's a value on it, but with a header, we're going to have to do things a little bit differently. We're going to have to, instead of grabbing the value, because values only apply to inputs, we're going to actually have to get the inner text, or set the inner text. So for the result, we can say inner text equals, and let's say test2, and then I'll save it. So test, that works here on the field here, and then inner text works here as well too on test2. Okay, and again, we use inner text and we don't use value. Like if we use dot value, okay, it doesn't work. It goes back to 100. Okay, so you got to use the inner text on things that are not input fields here. So we know these are working, so I'm going to delete these here, and let's call this video done. And so what we've done here so far is we've learned how to link. We have learned how to link our HTML to our code, or vice versa, our code to our HTML. And we use the document. Okay, so the document, your browser is going to know how to use this. Okay, it just magically appears, and that's what we get for free. The browser handles this, and then we call the function on it getElementById. Okay, and then we have this numfield. And by the way, keep in mind when it comes to DOM manipulation, always on Internet Explorer like 7 and 8. There are things that just don't work. I'm assuming nobody's still using that, and if you are, you probably shouldn't be. But just know that sometimes things don't work. So if you are on Internet Explorer 7 or 8 and not using Edge, and Edge has its own problems, it may or may not work, and we're not necessarily supporting that because you typically have to do a ton of extra work to support Internet Explorer, whereas Chrome and Firefox are right out of the box. They work, and Safari. And so we've learned how to get an element by its ID. And of course, you have to set the ID here. If you're running your page and nothing's happening, you're like, why isn't it setting the value? I've tested it. Well, it's probably because you missed putting the ID on here. You got to uniquely identify it. And then we went ahead and did .value to set the value. You can That's a getter and a setter property, so you can retrieve values from it and you can set properties or set values to it as well too. So a lot of good things here. You already know how to now inject things into your websites and retrieve things, and so you're already a step ahead of anybody else who just knows how to put pretty images and things on. You know how to write code that interacts. So good stuff. That's it. We'll keep moving forward. Mark Price at devslopes.com. See you next time.